In a culture that tells us we can choose motherhood or, Good Counsel knows we're meant for motherhood and. Hi, I'm Samantha Elbertson. I work on behalf of the maternity home Good Counsel. We have 4 homes in New York and New Jersey where motherhood is rescued, preserved, and celebrated every day. Welcome to our podcast, Motherhood and, where we spend time talking with women living out their vocation of motherhood and their roles in the community. We speak to pro-life activists, contributors to Catholic culture, entrepreneurs, great legal minds, gentle, humble hearts, those who work on behalf of women in need, breaking cycles of poverty, abuse, and homelessness, and mothers working every day to form and nourish a new generation. This is Motherhood and. I begin with a disclaimer. In this episode, we discuss abortion, and specifically hear the testimony of a woman who has had an abortion and through her trauma received the mercy of God and is now helping others, bringing healing and hope to those suffering post-abortion. With 3 decades of experience and over 2 with Good Counsel, Theresa receives requests from all over the country. She facilitates training for lay people, mental health professionals, and along with Father Mariusz Koch, CFR, has developed specific trainings for clergy in order to give them the tools they need to minister to those suffering. Lumina is a ministry of Good Counsel that assists those suffering from a prior abortion to reach healing and wholeness through talks, retreats, and other venues. As one of the first resources for those suffering in silence and alone, Lumina has pioneered new aspects of healing for those impacted, and they continue to expand their reach. Here to tell her story and speak about the good and necessary work of Lumina is the director of the Lumina program and co-developer of Entering Canaan post-abortion retreats, Theresa Bonapartis. Hi, Theresa. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Hi, Samantha. It's good to be here with you.
I thought we could start by getting to know you a bit better. Could you give us some of your history and your experience in post-abortion services?
Okay, so I've been doing post-abortion work for about 30 years now, and it really came about as a result of my own experience. I had an abortion when I was 17 years old. I grew up in the 60s, so it was the Woodstock generation, just that sexual freedom type of thing. And I just remember just feeling like something was wrong with me because I wasn't sexually active, and I started seeing someone and I ended up becoming pregnant. And just like any teenager, I was terrified to tell my parents. But the one thing that I never really worried about was abortion, just because I had grown up in a Catholic family and I knew abortion was against the faith. And I really didn't think that that would be an option. I grew up in an Italian American family. My father was pretty strict. So I was terrified to tell them, as any teenager would be, about my pregnancy. I talked to the father of the baby. He said that we could get married. And so I just kind of, thought that this is what was going to happen. And so I just hid my pregnancy because, like I said, I was terrified to tell my parents about it. And so I was in my 4th month of pregnancy before I actually told them. And I I had gone through like a million different scenarios in my head of what would happen when I told them about it, except for the one that actually did happen. My father got up from his chair. He told me to forget that I was his daughter, and he was going to forget that I was his daughter and to get out of the house. And my mother I would just remember I was in a state of shock and just going upstairs and trying to grab a few things, and my mother coming up after me and, they saying things that were not so nice, to me as well. And just being totally shocked and calling a friend of mine and having her come and pick me up. And I remember when I was leaving the house, my sister was coming over with my 2 nieces who were very small. And I remember walking down the walk and just thinking, I wonder if I'm ever going to see them again. And I got in the car with this friend of mine, and another friend, her mom told me that I could stay with them for a while. So I went to their house and I started staying there. And it was just really surreal. Like everybody would get up, go to school, go to work, and I would still be in the house, just really not knowing what I was going to do, how I was going to deal with things, because of all the pressure around me. I started fighting with the father of the baby, and I ended up telling him, just leave me alone. I can't handle this. Leave me alone. And he was a teenager too. What did he know? So
Right.
he did, he left me alone. And so there I was in this position. And I just want to say here, like Dave Reardon of the Elliott Institute, they do post-abortion research, and he talks about how most women are socially aborted before they ever step foot into a clinic. And I think that
Mm,
that is so true from my own experience and just what I've seen over the years.
wow.
So what ended up happening is, every day, like I said, I'd wake up, and who would go to school, who would go to work, and I'd be in this house by myself, and just really, like, the whole thing was just so surreal. And after a couple of days, my dad had my oldest sister start calling me and telling me that he wanted me to get an abortion, that he would pay for the abortion. And I would say to her, I'm not having an abortion. I don't want an abortion. It's not going to happen. And she would say to me, well, how are you going to support this baby? You don't have a home, you don't have a job, what are you going to do? And I'd say, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure something else. I'm not going to do it. And then a day or two would go by, and she'd call me again. And what ended up happening is, after a period of time, I ended up giving in, not because I wanted to have an abortion, but because I felt like I had no choice at all, that this was the only choice that I had.
Mm,
And I caved in to the pressures, and I had hid it for so long. I was in my 4th month of pregnancy, and I still to this day do not remember how I got to the hospital. I have no clue. But my abortion was actually in a hospital, and it was actually on the maternity ward of a hospital. They had me in a room, and no one told me the development of my baby. No one told me anything about the procedure that was going to happen to me. I was a kid in a room by
mhm.
myself. And I really had no idea what was going on, or like I said, the development of my baby or anything like that. And the doctor came into the room, and he looked like, I don't know if some people would remember Danny Kaye. He was an old comedian.
Mhm.
And after this, like, he looked like Danny Kaye. And after this, every time Danny Kaye would come on the TV, I would have to turn it off because I couldn't even bear to look at him.
Oh,
And he came into the room, and he proceeded to inject me with a saline solution. Again, not telling me anything that was going to happen, nothing. And a saline abortion is when they inject your abdomen with saline solution. And what it does is it burns the baby to death, and you go
mm.
into labor. And I just remember, like, I remember feeling things, but I had no idea. I was dumb, and honestly, I
You
was
were a
just like, so
kid.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
really had no clue what was going on. And my sister started calling me during this process, and she would say to me, was it over? And I would just say to her, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know what's happening here. And after a period of time, I went into labor. And I was in labor for many, many hours until I gave birth to a dead baby boy.
Oh,
And to this day, I still see him in my mind's eye, laying
yeah.
on the bed next to me. And I just remember when that happened, thinking to myself, I couldn't believe that it was legal. And I couldn't believe that people did these things. Like, it was so beyond me. Like, I was just like, how could this be possible, that this is allowed and that this happened? And I remember I rang for the nurse, and she came into the room, and she threw him in this big, like, those, it almost looked like a dressing jar that you would see in a restaurant. And
Yeah.
in front of it, it had the magic marker 3A. And she picked him up, and she put him into the jar, and she left the room. And
Oh,
all I could say is that, right, my life totally changed after that.
mhm.
I wanted to jump out the window, only I didn't have the courage to do it. And I just, like I said, I was just so stuck on, how is this possible that this is legal? How is this possible that they could do this? Like, I just couldn't even wrap my head around it. And even after I did it, my family wasn't speaking to me. So it was like just the craziest thing.
Wow.
So I ended up going out and staying with my sister for a while, but my life changed obviously dramatically after that. I hated myself, totally hated myself for caving into that and for doing it. And I really didn't see any way out. And, like they talk about this now, and many women still feel like this now. I mean, I get women in the ministry who call that had their abortions 30, 40, 50 years ago, and I could be the first person that they're telling. And so you bury it. And especially at that time, there was no help really out there. Nobody talked about it. If it bothered you, which still happens to this day too, as well, really. If it bothered you, then something was wrong with you. It's like somehow
Mm.
we became a society that taking the life of your baby and having it bother you, there's something wrong with you, not the fact that you took the life of your baby. That's how crazy things are. But it was especially very prevalent then, because there wasn't really any post-abortion help out there at all. And so I just got into this mindset of I'm doomed to hell, do whatever you want to do because there's no way back from this. I stopped going into church. I thought if I went into church, the walls would fall down upon me, or,
Oh,
I always felt like there was a big sign on my back saying, this woman killed her baby, like it was just all those different things. And so I really started in a downward spiral. I was promiscuous. I got high. And actually, to go back a little bit, the night that I went back to my friend's house after I had the abortion, all I can remember is she had a lot of our friends over and everybody was kind of partying and
oh.
drinking. And I remember walking in and just being like, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't, and I just remember getting totally drunk and then getting sick. Anything to escape would have just happened. And this is kind of the way I lived my life after that. Just totally, totally hating myself is basically what it was. Not being able to believe what I had done. And again, not thinking there could ever be any forgiveness for me and just holding it all in. And after a couple of years, my family, I was back in the family, but like so many families, even nowadays, something like this happens and nobody talks about it. It's like the
Yeah.
monster in the room of families, and everybody knows the monster's there, but nobody mentions what it was. And so I was welcomed back into the family, but no one from the day I got kicked out of the house ever mentioned the abortion. We just never talked about it. And I just started to go on with my whatever life it was that I had. And after a period of time, I ended up meeting the person who's my husband, and he was a drug and alcohol abuser. And, they say you pick what you think you deserve. And I obviously didn't think I deserved anything. And so I picked somebody really unhealthy. Well, I was very unhealthy myself at that time. And just ended up in a marriage that was really bad. And after but I didn't tell anyone in my family about his addictions because I had messed up so much before. I wasn't going to let them know I made a
Right. You had no
mistake.
trust.
So I was a
Yeah.
really good enabler, if I say so
Wow.
myself. And so after a couple of years, I got pregnant with my first living son. And I just remember that whole time being terrified that something was going to be wrong with him and that God was going to get me back because of what I had done. And,
Oh,
I had him and he was fine. And my husband actually ended up straightening out for a while and I ended up getting pregnant a second time. But by the time I was going to have my second son, his addictions were in full bloom again. And it was crazy. He was crazy. He would come home drunk and act out and stuff like that. And I always say, if I didn't have my kids, I might have stayed in that relationship forever, but because I didn't want them to grow up in that kind of an environment, I ended up when he started getting high again, my kids were like probably 2 and 4, something like that. I ended up one day when he came home really crazy, picking them up, one in one arm and one in the other, and walking out of the house. And I just remember getting into the car and thinking, here I am again, no job, no place to go, whatever. But this time I have my kids. And I
mhm.
ended up going and knocking on the door of my sister's house. And like I said, nobody knew what I was living with because I hid it so well. And I proceeded to tell her, all that happened. And this time my family was very helpful to me and accepting. And I stayed with her for a while. And then I ended up, after a period of time, actually, he ended up in the hospital, so I ended up being able to go back to where we were living, changing the locks, and really started on a road that I hoped was going to bring some kind of goodness into my life to be able to raise my kids,
Mhm.
and so I was working a couple of jobs because I had to support them, everything. It was a really difficult time, but at the same time, I thought I was building towards something. And
Sure.
after a couple of years, I still wasn't back in church or anything though, because I still felt that whole, and also when I was married, we would go for counseling, and I would say, "Oh, I had an abortion. This is bothering me." And then the counselors would say, "Oh, that's not what's bothering you. It's because he's an alcoholic." Like nobody would legitimize anything that I was
Mm.
feeling, or the fact of what would happen. So it was an insane time. So after a couple of years, I ended up going back to school to become a drug and alcohol abuse counselor. And I had a lot of help. My nieces would come over and watch the kids so I could do that. And I graduated and I was offered a job at an inpatient rehab. And I started working doing drug and alcohol abuse counseling. And I liked the work, but what ended up happening after a while was that in addictions, there's a lot of promiscuity, and a lot of promiscuity, there's a lot of abortions. And so I'd
Yeah.
start having clients that were struggling because of abortion and were looking for help. And I couldn't help them because I hadn't even been able to find help for myself. So it started to be this trigger for me, and a trigger where I just couldn't even face it, like it was so intense because prior to this, like I would have bouts with depression, close myself in my room, just cut myself off from everybody. Like I had a hard time, and I took care of my kids, but I would feel bad because they would see me depressed and all this other stuff. And so what ended up happening was one day I got up and I just couldn't go to work. It was like I completely burnt out,
Mm.
and I remember calling my mom, and she came over, and I said, like I always say, I built my house on straw and God wanted me to build it on him, because
Right.
I just totally burnt out. I couldn't even go to work. And I was devastated because I had worked so hard to work and go to school and raise my kids. And it was taken away from me in an instant. It was just all gone. And about that time, my older son was, you know, I did send them to religious instructions, although it would be like, "I'll leave you off on the corner. I'll pick you up at the
Oh,
corner. I'm not going in
yeah.
there." But I wanted them to receive their
Sure.
sacraments. So one day he came home, and he came home with a note about how, you know, we had to go to this meeting for first penance. The parents had to go. And I remember being terrified and thinking to myself, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to go to this." And I ended up going to the meeting, and it was in the bottom of the church, and all these chairs were in a circle. And the priest came out, and instead of talking about the kids, he really started talking to us. And he started to talk about, God's mercy and God's forgiveness, and how God could forgive sins. And he started listing different sins, and like God could forgive addiction, God could forgive adultery. And as he's going down the sins, all of a sudden I hear him saying God could forgive abortion. And I was like, did I hear this guy right? Did he just say that it's possible that God could forgive me because of an abortion? And I went home that night. By now it was years since I had had my abortion, and it was the first time I felt any kind of hope of healing at
Wow.
all. And
Yeah.
I was terrified, but I ended up calling this priest and asking him if I could come and speak to him. And I still remember the day I went, pulling up to in front of the rectory, feeling like my feet were glued to the floor of my car. I was so terrified to go in. But I was desperate. I was really
Sure.
desperate at this point. And so I went in and I started talking to him, and I just told him everything. I told him what I had been through, and I could still get teary-eyed because this was such a meeting of God's mercy for me. Like it was life-changing. And I started telling him about my experience, and it was the first time. By now it was probably, oh, it was over 10 years. It was probably more like 15 years since I had had my abortion. And for the first time I felt like somebody heard me, validated my feelings and was giving me hope. And it was just unbelievable. And you know, I went to the sacrament of reconciliation with him. He led me through the sacrament, and at the end of the session, he went and he got me like a miraculous medal and told me to put it on and not take it off. And then he got out a guitar and he sang a song to me about God's mercy and forgiveness. It
Oh,
was so beautiful. And I went home, and that was the beginning of my journey to healing. And after that, it was just, I started seeing him for spiritual direction. And I just really learned about the faith. I wasn't working because I had burnt out of my job. I mean, I think I had like what you would call a nervous breakdown. I never was hospitalized or anything, but it was just like being unable to function, you
sure,
know?
sure.
And so I wasn't working. So I was home, and I started going to daily mass. I started doing the Stations of the Cross.
Oh,
I
blessed.
started to spend time before the Blessed Sacrament, and I was
Mhm.
learning about the faith from him. And I would go before the Blessed Sacrament and say, Jesus, they say you're going to heal, that you can heal. Well, I'm not leaving you alone until you heal me.
Until you
I
do.
would actually
Good. Oh,
say
I
that, you
love it.
know, like
Yes.
I believe you. I believe that you could do this. And, you know, this went on for a long time. And after a period of time, I finally also found a counselor who knew the dynamics of post-abortion. And I started working with her. So I was going for spiritual direction, and as well as seeing her. And my healing, it actually came in a moment, although it took years to get to this moment. But one night I was like really struggling, and I didn't want my kids to see me crying again. And so I put them to bed, and I ended up going in the bathroom and closing the door because I didn't want them to hear me crying. And I called up this woman that I was seeing for counseling. And I just told her, because I was, you know, people need to really realize abortion is demonic.
Yes.
And you know, the devil's going to try to get you any way that he can, and you're fighting all these things, especially temptations to despair. And I had suicidal ideation, all of that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And I called her up because I was really getting attacked that night. And she just said to me, you're almost at the end. Just keep praying. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And so I went into the bathroom and I crouched down on the floor, and I just kept saying over and over again, Jesus, I trust in you. And I
Yeah.
did this for hours, Samantha,
Mhm.
hours. I was crouched on that floor. And in the middle of the night, I just felt this rush go through me, and I just knew he had touched me. It was like an unbelievable experience. And you know, I got up and I went to bed and I went to sleep. And the next day I woke up and I kept waiting for all those feelings to come back to me. And they didn't. They didn't. I mean, I'm not saying that I didn't ever have any struggles, but I knew that I
Sure,
was
sure.
forgiven, you know,
Yeah.
and I knew I was on the road. And so I just really, my whole life changed after that. I just kept, you know, in my spiritual life, getting closer to Jesus, learning more and more about post-abortion. I had you know, I had gone to school for the drug and alcohol abuse counseling thing. So what ended up happening for me is I ended up working for a Catholic agency doing drug and alcohol abuse counseling when I went back to work. And the woman who was the psychologist that ran the place, she was like, you know, I want to train you in doing counseling for people who are post-abortive. And that's really what happened is I had her, you know, I was seeing people that had addictions, obviously, because that was my thing, but she also was just giving me, you know, teaching me about the dynamics of post-abortion and different ways, and also you know, just really leading me. Obviously, she would do the cases with me, you know, whatever. And that's what ended up happening. So slowly I ended up getting into that until I ended up going to work for the Archdiocese here in New York. And I ended up being the Respect Life coordinator, and then eventually also the Project Rachel coordinator. And I
Wow.
started seeing people there. But then I had two kids to put through college, and I actually ended up leaving and going into corporate America because I needed money to pay for these college educations.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so, but by that time, one of the original Sisters of Life was a good friend of mine from before there was a Sisters of Life. And when I was in the diocese, I would say that Cardinal O'Connor was there then. And I would always say, we need stuff for post-abortive. We need more than this. We have to do something. And he promised me when he started the Sisters of Life that there would be, one of the apostolates would be ministering to people who had had abortions. So what ended up happening is, even though I did leave and I went into corporate America, I was still doing the post-abortion work on the side. And when the Sisters of Life were formed, we ended up, Mother Agnes and Sister Lucy and I, beginning these days of prayer and healing, and the Entering Canaan ministry. And so Entering Canaan was brought, it just was born, and we started out with days of prayer and healing, and inviting people in, for healing from abortion. And we started getting people. And then after a period of time, I wrote the first weekend, the Hope and Healing Weekend, and we started offering weekends. And it's really totally grown since then. We do days, we do ministry to men, for couples who had adverse diagnosis, for siblings. The sisters don't do all that. The sisters do the women. The other things I do with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, with them and stuff. But anyway, I'm jumping a little ahead here. So what ended up happening was Dave Reardon, who I mentioned before, who did the post-abortion research. By then we had become friends. I had read his books. One of his books, The Jericho Plan, just really spoke to my heart when I was searching for healing. And I called there one day and he answered the phone and we started talking. And over the years, we've developed a great friendship. But what ended up happening was that he wanted to do something here in New York, right? And Chris Bell, who's the founder of Good Counsel Homes, said that it had to be underneath something that was here in New York. And Chris Bell offered Good Counsel to be able to do this. So they called me up and they asked me if I would leave my corporate America job and come and do this work full time. And I said no. Because it was crazy, because my younger son was almost done with college, and it would have been the first time that I wouldn't have struggled financially, like in all these years from when I had walked out. And so they hired somebody else, and she took the job, and she worked there for 6 months, and she left. And when she left, Dave called me up and he was like, and Chris, and they were like, this job is for you. You need to take the job, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'll pray about it. And like I said, I was already doing post-abortion work on the side, but it wasn't my full-time job. And one night I went out to dinner with a couple of the women from the ministry and a priest that worked with us. And we were sitting in this secular restaurant talking about this whole situation with me taking this job. And as we were talking, Ave Maria starts playing over the left. And Father George turned around and said to me, what do you need, the burning bush? He was like, wait a minute, like, I've never heard Ave Maria in a secular restaurant before. And I was like, and I had been praying, God, if you want me to do this, I need a clear sign. I can't give up everything, like, I'll do it if you want me to. I promise you I'll do it if you want me to. And that was my sign. And so I ended up giving my notice and coming to work in Good Counsel. And it was good, because I was able to bring the things that I had already started doing as a basis for growing Lumina. And I already had a lot of contacts because I had been doing the ministry for many years. So I brought all of that with me when I came to Lumina. And then we expanded because as we were doing it, like, you just learn more and more and more of what's needed. And there really wasn't a lot of knowledge out there on post-abortion and the dynamics of it. And so we networked with we had a thing in the beginning, the Post-Abortion Healing Network, and it was us with Entering Canaan and Lumina, and then a crisis pregnancy center on Long Island, and different people, Rachel's Vineyard. We kind of joined forces to to really try to get things out there. And we started doing some trainings, and we did trainings for laity and for mental health professionals. And it just started growing in that way. And over the years, it's just continued to grow in educating other people in, in how to minister. I think probably the biggest thing I want to say here is just that we've had 63 million abortions, right? Since
Yeah.
Roe versus Wade.
That we know of.
There are millions and millions and millions of women and men and siblings who are hurt because of this. We have a world, I believe, the walking wounded. I really believe that. There are so many wounded people. Even, I know my whole family was wounded because of my abortion, even the people that wanted me to have it,
Absolutely.
And there is healing in the end of my story too. But, like, I just think it's just so, like, I see my one abortion, it affected my mother, it affected my father, like my mom, who I thought never thought about it. When we finally talked about it, told me how she carried that, and it was her sin, and she was going to take it to the grave. And thanks be to God, she was able to go to confession and really be healed from that. Like, it affected my sisters, it affected my father, who in the end, I mean, that was the last thing my father and I never really, he knew what I was doing, this work, and he would say, oh, you're doing that work, but he never really say anything else. And my spiritual director would say to me, I don't want you to confront your father. I want him to teach you forgiveness. I want him to teach you patience. And I would think to myself, oh, brother. But I see how what happened. And when my father was dying, the last thing we spoke about was my son. And just seeing the way that God worked in the lives of the people around me, and how my abortion impacted my children that I didn't even have yet. So it really it impacts everyone. So you're talking about one abortion. So when you think about 63 million abortions in our country, I mean, when we see these people that are out there and they're so radical, like these women and stuff like that, they're radical, most of them, because they've had abortions, and they have to keep justifying and rationalizing. They have to do all of those things.
To convert, and it means you have to come to the reality of what you've done.
Right. And
then
the whole
ask
thing,
for,
I think, where we lack, I really believe where we lack, just seeing this and being involved in it in so long, is that we're pro-life, but we don't reach out enough to those who have had abortions. And nobody is going to be able to look at their abortion experience until they're offered the love of God. That's the only way you can look, because it's too horrific to look otherwise. And so I just think much more we need, like, you don't see, there's not a whole lot of support for this kind of work. There really isn't. And I truly believe that, our job, and our job as a church even, right? Like, it's not to get people's votes, it's to get people's souls.
Correct.
And if we do that, if we bring people back to God, then he's going to take care of the rest, because those people are going to have conversions, and they're going to vote the right way, right?
Absolutely.
Because they know God's love and God's mercy. But if we don't reach out to them, they're very radical, because they have to keep justifying, they have to keep rationalizing, because there's no way they could look at what they did. And so, to me, it's crucial to end abortion. We could change all the laws we want. If we don't change hearts, nothing's going to happen.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. We can't win going toe to toe with the enemy's game, right?
Right.
We shouldn't.
No,
that's not where we belong.
And I've been, like, just so blessed to see, tons of conversions through this work. But like I said, there isn't enough. There's not enough resources. There's not enough help. There's not enough, like, people almost, sometimes it feels like people that have had abortions are brought out to tell their stories, but we can't bring them out to just to tell their stories. We need to care about their soul, their each one of their individual souls, and bringing them to healing and bringing them to God. And that's really what we should be doing. And by doing that, then each, who, like what it says in the Gospel of Life, right? St. John Paul says, you could become the most eloquent defenders of human life. That's what he tells people who are post-abortive. And I believe that, because who knows more than us? Nobody knows more than us what it's like,
Right.
what it does, how it is. No one, because it's something that we live with every day of our life. And so I think that's lacking, but anyway,
No,
so
absolutely. I think it's the kind of work that you're doing is more impactful. It's not the loud work. It's not the work of the speakers, the, those who are giving testimony in front of Congress, those who are out there at the march, those who are giving parish talks. All of those things are completely necessary. And if through this trauma and through what God's graces, where God's graces have brought you, if in that you feel called and you have the gift to communicate your story, to really reach people and just give them insight to what's going on, then that is 100% impactful. But the work that you're doing, where you're actually healing the souls, you're working with the women, the men, the children, you're working with those souls, that every life they come into contact with then is impacted.
because the dynamics that are out there, and then they're changing and they're touching other people, and it's just
Right.
it's like a chain
You're
reaction.
healing you're going to the source and you're healing that person. And so they're
And
coming more aligned with God's will for their life. And then that day-to-day interaction that they're having every day of their life is more impactful than a speech could ever be. We're supposed to walk and what was St. Francis, right? Preach the gospel, if necessary, use words, but live
yeah,
our lives. And so
yeah.
you're enabling people to get out from underneath their demons
And
grip
it
and
really
into
is
love.
like it's on a psychological level, a spiritual
100%.
level. There's so many different levels. So we try to educate them,
Oh
give
yeah.
them tools that they need to to heal, to give them the tools that they need to heal, to combat the attacks that happen against them.
Right.
It also builds community where they're able to support one another, which is very, very beautiful.
Very.
But a lot of them don't want to be public because they do feel,
Right.
a lot of people still feel judged by the pro-life movement. And I know we need to be careful here, because I know that part of it is we need to be compassionate, but we need true compassion. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
sometimes there's that false compassion out there. Like I know lately I've been seeing some things where people are calling abortion pregnancy loss, and it's not a pregnancy loss. It's a pregnancy loss in the fact that obviously the pregnancy is not there anymore, but you can't compare it to a miscarriage or something
No.
like that. You're actively participating in the death of your child. And just like what you said before, people need to look at what they did truthfully in order to be able to heal. We're not helping anyone by sugarcoating it at all. It's a
Correct.
horrible sin. It's a terrible, terrible sin. And nothing that you could do is going to make up for it. Nothing that you could say is going to make up for it. But the beautiful part is you don't need to make up for it, because Jesus Christ made up for it by dying on the cross for you. And I think that's the thing that people need to know. Like, they need to know that it's there for them, that God is
Right.
waiting for them, that he wants to give them healing, that he wants to give them forgiveness, that their children want their healing and forgiveness, and that they need to open up and learn and trust and allow him to work in their lives. And that's what we need to do. But many of the people that come through the ministry, I've had women in the ministry that have been working in the ministry for almost the whole 30 years that I've been doing it, but still won't speak publicly because they feel like people judge them all the time. time. And so I think that's something like you kind of say, well, what does that say about us? And I think that part of it is because some people hear this watering down of it. And so they're like, well, whatever, like we're not going to, and it's true. We can't water it down. It is what it is. We need to look at it truthfully, but we also need to bring them to God's compassion and God's healing and their forgiveness. And then they're the greatest advocates for God, as far as I'm concerned, so I think that, I don't know. I like I said, I've seen so many miracles of his mercy. I can't even tell it. I have so many great stories.
And I'm sure it's no news to you, but the impact to look back at your life and know what you've suffered had such meaning.
Well, it's so funny.
And God used it to help, I mean, directly to help other women who are going through what you went through so that they might not despair as long, right? That
to show them the way.
It's a beautiful testament.
I mean, one of the things, well, just a couple of things. Yes, to show them the way. One of the things is, like, I used to be so shy. I would be afraid to order McDonald's. That's how shy I was. And now God has me out there talking about my worst sin. I know it's not me. I am totally sure it's not me that's doing this. I received the grace because this is what he's asked me to do. But I was always terrified of everything, and then to be out there and speaking about this is just like, it's mind blowing. And I've seen him do that in so many different people's lives where he's touched them. And then they give their lives to him because they know what he's done for them. And one of the things that, like with Entering Canaan, Our Lady of Czestochowa is the patroness of Entering Canaan. I don't know if you've seen her. She's got the scars on the side of her face. And that came to me in prayer one day. I didn't even know who she was. I didn't know anything about her, but I knew she wanted to be part of the ministry. She wanted to be part of the ministry. And when I read about her, and she had gotten damaged in the war, and she's got the scars on her face, and the icon said to be done by Saint Luke. And it got damaged, and then they hired painters to cover up the scars again, but the scars kept coming back out. And I remember when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is why she wants to be the patroness, because it's just like with abortion. Forget about it. It's in your past. The society tries to cover up that scar, but it keeps coming back out again. And so she's the patroness of the Entering Canaan ministry, but also it's just really beautiful is that I totally believe that it's her ministry. Like, she's the one that did it. And also that she leads you to her son. She leads you to healing. And we have a painting that I commissioned somebody to do that, it's actually in the wall back here. You probably can't see it, but she's, is sitting beneath the cross holding an aborted baby with Mary Magdalene next to her. And it's like relinquishing your child to Mary at the foot of the cross. And then in the background, she's leading you to the promised land. So it's really like her leading you to her son into healing. And I truly believe that's what she does. She's just totally instrumental in this ministry in Lumina as well, obviously, because these are the retreats that we offer. And so I don't know, we've just like grown over the years too. And we do like Lumina hosts the Entering Canaan retreats, the Mercy retreats, and we started days for men. We do ministry for men as well, because we felt like it was important for them to be separate, because we found that if they were with the women, that they weren't as honest, that maybe they were protecting the women and they weren't really getting into their own healing and their own behaviors and what they did. So we do separate them. We just had a retreat last weekend with 7 men. That was phenomenal. And it's great when they're just with other men. They're much more honest. They'll talk about what they did or whatever. When we obviously have a team that works with them. And then like 13 years ago, we started doing retreats for siblings of aborted babies because it impacts the
Oh, yeah.
siblings. And people don't realize that. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, I had my abortion before I had my kids. It didn't have anything to do with them. But that's not true, because of course, it had something to do with them, because it had something to do with you and it impacted you. And also it has something to do with them because they have a sibling that's not here. And
Right.
it brings up a lot of different things for them. Would my name be the same? Would I even be here if she didn't have that abortion? Was I wanted? There could be issues surrounding, there's just so many aspects of it. And so many kids nowadays have siblings that have been lost through abortion.
Right.
And not only a sibling, but some people have
Multiple.
multiple siblings.
Yeah.
I had, a few years ago, we did a sibling retreat in Maryland, and we had a woman, in her, I forget, she was like in her late 70s. She actually drove up from Florida when she heard about it, because her mom had had a few abortions, and she was just so excited that somebody was addressing this.
Yeah.
So
To
we had,
talk about a shared experience.
and to really being able to give the tools. I mean, we really have it pretty down pat now. It's a beautiful weekend, really, really beautiful. And we have people coming from all over the country to participate in it. We actually have one in April. This coming April, one coming up, if anybody is interested in it. It's just a beautiful weekend that really delves into specific issues surrounding being a sibling of an aborted baby. And
Mhm.
there's time to share, and there's different conferences by the priest, by a sibling, and it's just a really beautiful weekend as far as giving information to help you to heal, but also in connecting to other people that have been in the same position. So it's nice. It's really nice.
We have in our country, in our world, we focus so much on trauma. We have protections and considerations and every law and modification in our society to protect any kind of trauma, even speaking ill against someone
Right.
causes trauma enough to spark litigation. I mean, we have become a society that is so easily offended and worried about triggers, and yet we are erasing people from history and acting like that's not
Right.
a big deal.
Exactly.
And you're not
And
supposed to
denying
feel
that
it.
it's a trauma. Look at the
I
American
mean,
Psychological Association, even
and
says there's no such thing as
yeah,
post-abortion stress.
when
Oh,
you
really?
yeah,
Have you talked to
when
anybody who has had
who's
it?
had one, right, and truly been through a healing process to understand it. When I think about the pro-life movement and what really moves me, where because everything is necessary, we're not all called to do the same thing.
Right, of
Obviously, it's
course.
multifaceted, but this is
Right.
an area where I feel that babies are being aborted and in horrific, painful ways, and we know that. But even more grave is the damage to the soul of the people left behind.
Well, and I think because we know,
That's
I mean, like you might get a little, like, some people don't believe this. I totally believe
right.
the babies are in heaven. I believe in the baptism of blood.
Right.
Pope
Right.
John Paul II in the Gospel of Life says a couple of, your children who are living in the Lord. And
Right.
I can't imagine that they wouldn't be with God because they did nothing. So I guess abortion's wrong. Abortion is
Absolutely.
always wrong. There's never a case that it's okay. But at the same time, those babies are in heaven now, but there are millions and millions of souls lost to God because of abortion. And that's what I meant
Right.
when I said before, too. Our
Absolutely.
job as a church is not to tell people how to vote, it's to save souls. I mean, not that we're not going to educate on, I don't mean that we don't educate on
No,
elections or something like
absolutely. And
that.
you need to vote.
But
Even voting impacts your soul, right? What are you
right,
voting for? What's your intent? What is
right,
your purpose? Are you taking your civic responsibility seriously? Because it does affect lives. And
right.
so we can't get lost in that. diving into deep holes, darkness, despair, caught up in all of that
But
more than
I think
caring
we
for the
really
souls of
need to address the fact that a lot of people are voting for pro-choice candidates because they feel like they're judged by other people. And so they have to keep on making it okay. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Like, I
absolutely.
know that that's true. I don't think that that's true. I
No,
know
absolutely. Or I'll see my friends, saying things, just defending it to the end in the utmost degree. And you're like, there's only one reason why you're doing this.
right.
There's only one reason why you would go to battle for this.
Yeah, I mean, look
For
at
the
how
kill.
desperate we are.
Yeah.
Look at, and even here, like I'm in New York, look at in New York,
Oh, yeah.
Letitia James. I mean, look at her, the attorney general here. She's had an abortion. She says she's had an abortion because of her career, because she wanted this job. And she'll go after pro-lifers like crazy, anything, because she's got to keep it legal. She's got to keep it okay. She's got to keep justifying it. It's
She's got to
horrific.
protect her own sin. And
It's
instead of
horrific, though, that
rooting it
she's
out and
using that
finding healing.
position
Yeah.
to attack people like that, to try to close crisis pregnancy centers,
Oh,
to
man.
throw rescuers in jail, to do a whole bunch of different things that doesn't happen with anything else. What's more protected than abortion in our country? Like I often
Right.
say, we walk by these clinics every day and nobody gives a thought to what's going on inside of there.
Right.
It's horrific. The whole thing is horrific. And I think just the damage is so astronomical. And again, it's just our responsibility, I think, to reach out to these people. It's the response to bring them back to God again, and to get them
Absolutely.
healed, and so that their souls are in a good place. And it's crucial. There's no question about it. And
Right.
to do it in different ways. Like one of the other things that we do is with one of the friars in the renewal, I travel to different dioceses. We do a training for priests, because a lot of times people don't talk about it because they don't know how to talk about it. They're afraid they're going to offend someone. And, they have to learn how. We always have to talk about the wrong of abortion and how wrong abortion is, and but never without offering the forgiveness and the mercy of God. Like there's got to be a balance of those two things. Yes, it's always wrong, it's horrific how terrible abortion is, but God is merciful. He could forgive any sin.
I think the
And
sin of
so,
assuming he can't, the
right,
sin of assuming there's something he can't forgive is greater
wrong.
than any other. So
Right.
yeah,
Nothing. Yeah.
absolutely.
Nothing
There's
is
nothing he can't
there's
forgive.
nothing that
He
he can't
wants
forgive.
to. He's longing, he's asking, he's
Right.
more than anything, he wants to forgive these sins. That's why he sent his son. So for anyone listening, if you've had an abortion, if you've had any sort of role in someone else's abortion,
Right.
God sent his son for you, not other people's sins, not other sins
Right.
that you've heard of.
Exactly.
He knows, and he is waiting and wanting to forgive you. You just have to show up. You just have to make
Right.
the
And
first
it's
move, because it's always an
scary. I mean, I get
invitation,
it.
right?
It's scary. I talked about how my feet were glued to
Yeah,
the car for,
absolutely.
I was so terrified to go, but all I could say is it's okay.
Yeah.
You're going to find that it's okay if you go, and you're going to be so relieved. I had this woman, she was like in her 80s, and I don't even remember how she found me. And she's since passed away, but, she finally came to a day of prayer and healing. And at the end of the day, her daughter didn't want her to come. She told her daughter about her abortion because she needed a ride there. And her daughter was like, "Oh, this is too much for her. I don't think she should come." And she was like, I'm going. And she came.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she turned around and she said to me, "Honey, I wish I did this years ago." Like it was
Oh.
just so beautiful that she had suffered with this for like 60 years. And there's so many stories like that. I had this one woman, she was 93, and she reached out to Father Benedict Groeschel, one of the founders of Good Counsel Home. And he asked me to get in touch with her, and I started corresponding with her. And she still lived alone at that point. And she had had 3 abortions, and she had held them in all that time. No one knew. Her kids didn't even know. And actually, that was how we stopped corresponding with each other, because when she wasn't able to live by herself anymore and she had to go live with her children, she didn't want them to know.
Oh,
And so we stopped. But think about that. To carry that around with you for decades and decades and decades, and no one else knows about it. It's just like, what a burden. And it is really scary, but
yeah,
there's nothing to be afraid of, because
right.
if you're sorry, God's mercy and forgiveness is there for you. And so one of the things with the priests, that I do with Father Mariusz Koch, one of the Franciscan friars of the
Mhm.
Renewal, and we really have developed a great training, specifically for priests, where we teach them about post-abortion, but we focus on what they need to learn. Like if somebody comes to the sacrament of reconciliation, if somebody comes for counseling, if what kind of penances to give. So it's really geared for them, and it's just been an amazing thing. Like once we've done it, like how the priests change and they start reaching out. And the funny story is, one time, one of the women from the ministry was all excited, and she called me up telling me about how this priest in her parish talked about post-abortion, and she couldn't believe it, and she was so happy. And so I was like, wow. I said, you know what, I'm going to call this priest. They always hear terrible things. Let me tell him, you know what an
Yeah.
impact he made. So I called him up, and I'm talking to him, and he started laughing, and he said to me, oh, well, you should thank you and Father Marius, because I only did that because I went to one of your
Oh,
trainings. Like, I
that's
didn't
it.
even know. It
Yes.
was so funny, but it was such a confirmation. And
Yeah.
it's so true that once it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that they maybe don't know how to do it without
You don't have the tools.
offending.
Yeah.
So if they're given those tools and they learn, then they will reach out and they will do it, and people would come forward. So we do that. We've done a few already this year in different dioceses across the
Mhm.
country. It's not just
And
in
I'm
our
sure
area.
they address it at some point in seminary, but I
Not
think it, to the extent that which women need you to know what they
Yeah,
need.
I don't know how
Yeah.
much they address it in
Mm,
seminary, like I don't, but many dioceses across the country have had us do it, and
that's
it's
great.
been very positive for them,
Yeah,
that then they have the tools to be able to go forward. So,
that's beautiful.
these are the things that we need to do to educate
And
people,
those are the things that are the
counselors,
most impactful at saving souls right there. I
right?
mean, who
Exactly.
has the power to absolve sins but
Right.
be
That's
ordained? So
right. Got to
that's
get those priests
fantastic.
in
That's
there. That's right.
fantastic.
What
Absolutely.
would we do without our priests,
That's
right?
right. Pray for our
It's
priests.
amazing. Yeah. So,
So the women who are told they shouldn't have trauma, it's not trauma, you shouldn't be affected by it. You should just get an abortion because financially or because of your career is taking
yeah.
off and this will impact that. Women are told so many things, and I always thought it was so absurd. I mean, now we're just calling it the abortion movement versus the pro-life movement, right? Pro-abortion, because it was pro-choice for so long. And then since working with Good Counsel to see how few choices are offered to women ever, it's almost like this is you don't have a choice. This is your only option, is to get an abortion because your circumstances aren't quite right. Um, or you're a little bit afraid, or you need a little bit of a support, and we're not going to give you that, but let's just get rid of this problem. I think it's so funny how many choices, how many options, the variety of healing and support and generational impact that a place like Good Counsel and other ministries that stem from maternity homes, um, the ways how pro woman and how pro healing a woman so that she can bring up the next generation. um it's exponential, and it's almost you can't understand in God's fullness, right? We'll know, but you can't
Yeah.
understand the impact that work like
It,
Lumina is actually doing. And I know a lot of the mothers who come through Good Counsel uh unfortunately have had an abortion or have been
right.
coerced and are escaping that and choosing life for their children. So um
Yeah.
the fact that they're in our homes is such a beautiful testament that
And we
they
do, and we do. I have like a letter that I write that's in their
yeah,
welcoming packet. And in the welcoming packet, it just says, because sometimes they're afraid to come forward and say they had an
sure.
abortion because they know we're pro-life and they're afraid we're going to kick them
Mhm.
out. And which is
Oh,
absolutely not true,
not at
obviously.
all. Yeah.
And so there's a letter that I write that's in the packet that just says, if you've had a prior abortion, there's help available to you. You could call me. It would be confidential. You don't need to worry about getting kicked out of Good Counsel. That's not going to
Right.
happen.
No, not
And
at
with
all.
some pamphlets and stuff. And a
Right.
lot of times they're not ready right now, obviously, because they're having a baby and there's a lot going on with them. But it's not unusual for them to have this information. And maybe after they've had their baby and they're out on their own. I had one mom from Good Counsel who became so involved in the post-abortion program. She used to come and give talks at the retreats.
Oh,
So,
that's beautiful.
like they might not
Yeah.
want to do it right when they're at Good Counsel. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll ask to talk to me and whatever. But a lot of times they're kind of like overwhelmed with what's facing them right now, to having the baby, getting an
Mhm.
education, a job, a place to live, all that kind of stuff. But they'll keep the information and reach out after. And they
Yeah, just
know that
like
if
when
they're
you had
struggling, because a lot of times when you're pregnant, just like when I said I was afraid something was going to be wrong with
right.
my baby. So some of them might want to talk,
Mhm.
and reach out with that. So it's actually, it's good. So they know where they could go. If they're not ready, then they could come later. I do like a retreat for the moms once a
Mhm.
year.
Mhm.
It just about motherhood, like and it's very beautiful. Like all the Good
That's
Counsel
beautiful.
moms come from all the
Yeah.
different houses, and we have a retreat for them. And one of the things that I do also is I pray in front of clinics sometimes.
Mhm.
And I pray in front of the New York City clinic, a Planned Parenthood, and I carry a sign when I go that drives the other side crazy, because it's kind of just feeds into what you were just saying. So the sign says on it, I had an abortion. Life does not go back to normal, because what do they tell women? Oh, have this abortion, your life will go
So
back
that your life can go
it
back to
was
normal. Yeah.
before. So it just
Right.
says, I had an abortion. Life does not go back to normal. Save your baby and yourself. And then it has Good Counsel's phone number on it, our
Mhm.
800 number, so that they could call to be able to get the help that they need. And it's been interesting. They try to block me all the time so that the women coming to the clinic can't see the sign. Last month, it was interesting because actually the clinic escort saw the sign and started crying. So she had
Oh,
an abortion in her past.
yeah.
And I'm sure it rang true with her. Life does not go
Right.
back to
Right.
normal. And again, this is the justification and the rationalization. I'm out here leading other people, being a clinic escort, because I have to keep rationalizing and justifying and saying abortion is a good thing, and
Right.
it's not a good thing. I mean, I felt really bad for this woman, but obviously it triggered things in her. And at the clinic they try to cover it up and stuff, but obviously the point being, hopefully that somebody walking in there is going to see that, and it'll make them change their mind and call the 800 number, to get some help, so
Mm.
that they don't make that life altering terrible choice.
What always it's so important that women know they don't have to make a decision right away.
Right.
I feel like when you're pregnant, there's this, obviously, if it's a crisis pregnancy situation, there's a panic and an urgency. But
Right.
take some time.
And how many people
Think about
are
it.
coerced by
Right.
boyfriends, by husband, like me, my parents?
Do it now. Get rid of it
How
now.
many
Get rid of
people
it
get
now.
coerced
Yeah.
into an abortion, and nobody seems to worry about them? You
Yeah.
don't see anybody. A matter of fact, there's laws like, when you try to pass laws to protect people against coercion, the pro-abortion people are against those laws, which is, if you
Right.
really cared about women, you wouldn't want to see a woman that is coerced into an abortion getting an abortion. You'd want to protect her from those things. And
Right.
that happens a lot because, like, women will come and say, well, I wasn't coerced, I made the decision myself. But most times, if you're really talking to them, there was some kind of pressure that made them feel like they had to do this. And again, that's not justifying the abortion. I'm not doing that at all. I'm
No.
just
But
saying that
even if you don't
there
have
are
an
very few
abusive,
people that joyfully walk into an abortion
correct.
clinic to have an abortion, is what I'm
Correct.
saying.
Yeah, even if they're not having an abusive spouse, or an issue there. There's a reason why they feel like they can't support another life. There's
Right.
something in them that they feel is inadequate, or is they're lacking in some way that they
Right.
couldn't possibly, right? They couldn't
Yeah,
entertain that idea. So
and then
that
you
in
have to say that,
itself,
why do these people want to shut the crisis pregnancy centers
right?
down? Or like, if you really care about women,
Right.
why can't they know about these things? Why are you so insistent in trying to put them out of business and things like that?
There are
Um,
certain crisis pregnancy resources that I know I get, emails from, or contacted by, and they'll say, this woman, whoever, it's all confidential, but they'll say, Sarah is considering an abortion, and she says the main thing is she won't be able to make rent 1 month. And so this is what we want to fundraise to cover her rent for the next 6 months, and all of her needs for her baby. And it's something like $10,000.
right,
It's
I
something
know.
really
Yeah, but it's the
not.
truth. Like, people, and
That's all
they,
that's standing in the way of someone's
right,
life,
right, right. It's so true.
and the mother's life, because of what happens to her post-abortion. And anybody that it's
And it's
exponential.
so amazing to watch. Like I said, I've been here like for, I don't know if it's 21 or 22 years. I think, yeah, I don't know. I can't even remember exactly what year I came. But anyway, so we have staff meetings every so often where all the staff gets together from
Mhm.
all the houses, people, all over the country. And so I'm not in the homes, obviously, because you're not going to make a post-abortive person come to a home with pregnant women. It's just not a good,
Right.
it's not a good setup.
Right.
So I work outside of the homes, but obviously I'm part of the staff meetings, and I go to these staff meetings and I listen to the staff, and I see the staff and the love of the staff, and it's a tough job. I mean, a lot of these people that come are not easy to deal with or whatever, and yet there really is the face of Christ there with these people that work there, and the way they are with the moms. And like the last staff meeting, one of the moms lost her baby, and
Mm.
the couple of the people that worked in that house were just so upset. And like it really is a family, the Good Counsel family. And I go to these staff meetings, and it never feels that I leave like so impressed with what goes on, and the way that the people are, and the people that are able to have their babies and get on their feet and learn life skills and learn all of those things. And I'm sure there's a part of me, like when I was pregnant, I don't even know if that there was anything like that out there. You know what I mean? I don't think that there was. And
Mm.
just thinking about how wonderful it is that these women have this opportunity to still be able to have their children and to get on their feet. And I'm just always really proud of Good Counsel. And like I said, I know it's not always easy. It's tough. It takes a lot of money to keep all these houses going, but it's so worth it. And when you see, like at events, with a mom that comes with a baby that she has, or a child that she has, because it's been how many years that Good Counsel has been around, that these people that are
It's
productive members of
1985.
right, right. And I always say, like, we need to do something where, we have something. I always say, um, how do you measure success? One life at a time. And just from a
Mm.
newborn up to somebody that was one of the first people that was saved, through Good
Right.
Counsel, and what they're doing. It's just so amazing to look at all the babies, all the people, the adults too, that would
Right.
not be here if it wasn't for Good Counsel homes, and all
We've
the
had,
people that have
yeah.
had healing because of
Yes.
Lumina. Like, it's just
Mhm.
really such a an unbelievably beautiful thing when you think about it. And I'm so grateful to God that something like this exists, for both, for the pregnant moms, and also for those people who are suffering because of an abortion, because it changes lives. There's no question about it.
Absolutely. It can't be it can't be overstated,
No,
right?
it
Yeah,
really
we
can't.
have we have beautiful testimonies from women who come back and their grown children are speaking. We just had, I think it was in the Spring Valley home. So Exodus is what we call, is the name of the program for women who have left the homes, left the program. They're never out of the Good Counsel family, right? They're called
Right,
Exodus,
right. Yeah.
and they forever have our support. They forever can. I mean, so often they come back and they have their holidays with Good Counsel, right? They'll come back and do Christmas in the homes. They'll come back
Yeah,
and
it's
do Thanksgiving. It's
beautiful.
really a beautiful
Well, for
relation, or
some
they
of these
give
women,
back.
it's the
It's
first
really,
time that they've really felt any
yes,
support and love, right?
yes, and that's what makes it so challenging. You're finding you're meeting women and starting to walk with them in their most vulnerable
Right.
places. And that's what makes, and we talk about trauma, the trauma that's led them to our doors or led them to the Lumina program. This, like you said, the walking wounded is such a, it's so profound. We all have some trauma, right? There's all some, no one is out there
Oh,
just
it's true.
this bubbly. That's not why we're here. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, right? This isn't our, this is our, we're journeying through this life to get to
Right.
what we're meant for.
Exactly.
So we shouldn't be surprised, but we have, yeah, as a society, we have to stop acting like there's some perfection to be obtained. And that there's some wholeness aside from, outside of Jesus's mercy, out of God's love. So yeah, the ability to impact the lives and generations from every mother that comes our way, like you're seeing, you get to see the other side of that. That's truly where God
Yeah.
is working through you, and healing. That
Yeah.
healing is not just, it's not just making their lives easier, it's doing the hard work, walking with them where they're most
It's just so
vulnerable. And
beautiful. I just like I just tell you a short story of one of the people that came to us that got pregnant when she was like 15 years old. Her sister took her for an abortion, and like me, she was just like in a downward spiral after that and ended up having multiple abortions. And when she
Mhm.
came to us, um she had, I don't know, 5 or 6 abortions, something like that,
Um,
and was totally broken, and became involved in the ministry and went through the ministry and stayed involved in the ministry, and her whole life changed. Got a relationship with God, got healing, ended up meeting a great guy, and she was in a good place, got married, a real Catholic marriage, um, and is married and has a few kids now, and her whole life is just so totally different. And to just really see somebody to come in so broken and despairing of everything, and feeling like they're condemned to hell forever, and
mm,
to watch God move in their lives and to heal them and bring them to him. And these people, like I said before, have such gratitude and such love for God, because they know the way they felt before, and
right.
they know what he's done for them. And so there's just such a yearning to live a good life, and to just, totally change. They see the changes in their life. It's just so beautiful. And I mean, I have so many stories, because obviously over all these years
Sure.
I've had come into contact with so many people, but God is just so good, and just totally,
Oh my
that's what he
God.
wants. That's what he
Yeah.
yearns, to bring people back to him and to have this healing. So, you
Mm,
know, it's different. Good counsel saves the babies in this life. And I believe in the spiritual, relationship with your child, in
mm.
this life, until you're with them in the next life, for those who have had abortions. So, it's just really beautiful. It's really beautiful to see how God works in people's lives, because I'm not doing it, that's for sure. I mean, I'm pointing them in the directions they need to go, or educating them about what they need, how they need to move forward and stuff, but it's all his. They're the ones that are doing it, and it's just so absolutely amazing to watch. And I'm very grateful. It's tough work, I'm not going to lie.
Oh,
It's
I
not easy,
absolutely.
but it's also very much of a blessing to be part of it. And I'm very grateful to God for allowing me to do it, and I'm grateful to Good Counsel for allowing me to do it too.
I want to thank you again, Theresa, for spending time with me. And I want to take this moment right now to be sure to share all of the resources that are available post-abortion. You mentioned some of them in your talk. I'll bring up the postabortionhelp.org website. It's important, even if you're not struggling with a past abortion, that you keep this information kind of in your back pocket. You never know who you will encounter, the walking wounded among us, and how God can use you as a channel of peace to someone who might not know that this kind of healing and wholeness is available to them. So the website is postabortionhelp.org. There are retreats and information for women, men, siblings, couples who received an adverse diagnosis for their baby in the womb. There's retreats and events, prayer services. There's lots of resources. So the next event coming up, I believe, is scheduled in, here it is, scheduled in April 5th through the 7th. That is for the impact of abortion on siblings. So if you are interested in this, you can call the number or email Theresa directly at lumina@postabortionhelp.org. And you can subscribe. The other thing that's helpful, I wanted to make sure to note, is there's a little bookstore here. So these are books that Theresa and her team recommend or have been helpful to them, going through abortion healing, some of which they use, like Theresa talked about the Jericho plan, they used in the retreats. And then there's also the book that Theresa, I want to plug this a little bit. Theresa wrote a book called A Journey to Healing Through Divine Mercy. So that's available on this bookstore, at this bookstore on their website. If you click there, I think it takes you, to the Marian Press. So it's available there, and it's also available on Amazon. And of course, you can always reach out to Theresa and her team through their website, and there's options to really support the Lumina program through Good Counsel. And every retreat is free, and this healing and hope, it's Theresa and her team, it's their wish, their plan, their prayer to offer this to anyone in need, and to even sometimes help with transportation if they're coming from out of state, or whatever's needed to make this possible for anyone who is looking for help post-abortion, because it's one of the most important messages that's not getting out there, but that God forgives abortion, and that you really need to face the sin before you can feel that healing and that wholeness with the Father. So thank you again, Theresa, so much for all the work that you do. I'd like to end with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. If a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't have to worry about how she's going to carry, deliver, and care for her child. She can call Good Counsel. We need you to help spread the good news that Good Counsel's doors are open for all women, pregnant and parenting, and in need. Please join us and be an advocate for motherhood. Subscribe to our podcast, Motherhood and, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please be sure to visit Good Counsel's website for more information and to get involved at goodcounselhomes.org. We ask that you share our maternity help website, help.goodcounselhomes.org. Please share this website with others often so that it will reach more women in need. Subscribe to Good Counsel's YouTube channel for more inspiring and edifying content about maternity homes, the pro-life movement, and the life and ministry of Good Counsel's founder, Father Benedict Groeschel. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Good Counsel Homes. If you have any questions or ideas for future guests or topics, please message us on Facebook or Instagram. Remember, life is love. Talk to you soon.